Thank you, sir, for joining us.
Great to be with you guys.
So, have you ever spoken to Brad about Invest America?
Yes.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, he's got a lot of enthusiasm for it, and it's. He first shared it with me a couple months ago, and I think it's great how he's developed it out. I do like it as a policy. I think it's something people could definitely get behind. He hired a great gentleman to work on it, a guy, Matt Lira, who used to work with me in the White House, who's a real superstar. And I think it's got real potential. So I give him credit for trying and for pushing forward policies. And you know what I learned when I was in Washington too, there's a lot of people with ideas, and then they come and they give you the idea and they think it's going to happen. Very few people are willing to roll up their sleeves and get to work. And I admire the way that Brad has been researching it and pushing it in a very strategic and thoughtful way.
Yes, yeah, he is definitely committed. I heard a story recently from a friend of mine who had given his daughter $10,000 about 15 years ago, and he put it into a brokerage account, and he let her pick the stocks. Today, it's worth $155,000. I think her track record is better than pretty much everyone here.
It's very humbling for a lot of the people who have been interviewed here. So, but I will say too, I mean, I do that with my children, where we kind of do, small dump money in stocks, and it's just very interesting to give them the reports from the companies. They come back, you sit down, you read through it, you ask them why they like one company versus the next, and it's amazing how curious their minds are. And then they see these different companies applied in their daily lives, and then they come back and say, well, we should sell this stock. I think this is going down, or electric vehicles are going to be there, maybe gas cars, and it just leads to a lot of interesting conversations. So I think a lot of the intent behind the program is very, very thoughtful and very, very smart.
Yeah, it's definitely good to start them early.
Yeah.
All right, well, we want to talk about your firm, Affinity Partners, but if you could just give us a quick background on your time and your time in business, really leading up to the White House, that would be great.
Sure. So, oh man, I could do the long version.
Do the short version.
So I grew up in New Jersey, went to college, law school, business school, got into all different kinds of business. When I was in college, I was buying buildings. My family was in the real estate business, so I grew up with my father. He wasn't really big into Sundays going to football games. Instead, he would take me with him to the job site, so we were always trained in business. I started a company in college when I was 19. It was made some good money while I was doing that, and then decided after I wanted to go to law school and business school. Did that. While I was doing that, I went to while I was in school, I also bought a newspaper, so that was an interesting one. And I got into kind of the transition from old newsprint to internet, which turned out to be an interesting migration to be a part of. Met a lot of people in that through New York, and that was very helpful to the other businesses we were doing, which was real estate, and we did some investing in technology and other private investments. And so that was really the journey. And then I obviously got involved in politics in 2015, and the rest is a little bit, better known.
Yeah, for sure. So you were senior advisor to the president, and during your time in the White House, I'm going to just read a few of your achievements here. You led the effort to pass the First Step Act, a criminal justice reform bill passed in 2018. You were a primary participant in the Middle East peace process that led to the signing of the Abraham Accords. You also helped broker the USMCA trade deal between US, Mexico, and Canada. And I'd say that's like a pretty good list for someone who was younger than 40.
You should see all the things I didn't get done that I tried.
But
we had a very busy time. Again, working for President Trump was, he really increased the metabolism of government, and I was very fortunate that he gave me a lot of different hard problems to go after. Leaving the private sector to go serve in government, a lot of people said, why would you take on so many different efforts, and why would you take on so many hard efforts? But I basically said, if I'm going to leave, my life behind from New York, and I was making a lot of money, I was, had a very enjoyable life, then I was only going to give that up to try to, do things that I thought would be really game-changing. And so I was very fortunate to be able to work on a lot of incredible challenges with some amazing people, and we made a lot of progress, so I was very proud of it.
Tell us, what's the difference between doing a deal in business versus a deal in politics?
Yeah, so that's, there's a lot of different elements of it that are different. The process to get there by and large in business, there's much more conventional structure on how to accomplish something, right? You know the first thing you want to do is say, do I like the business? What's the price? And then there's like a mechanism with lawyers and representatives and accountants and diligence that people are quite trained in doing. In government and politics, often the perpetuation of a problem is more advantageous to the participants than actually solving a problem. And what was
Their
interesting,
incentive is completely backwards.
yeah, and I don't think it's necessarily a bad intent problem. I think it's probably like 90% lack of capability and 10% maybe, maybe not always the best intent. But in politics, what I found is people were very good at talking points. So it takes a lot more skills, I think, to be successful in politics than it does in the private sector. I remember after my first year in government, which was a really, really rough year, I had a gentleman who worked with me who was formerly at Microsoft and General Motors. And I said to him, how does this compare? I thought we were working at a fairly high level to being in the private sector at the highest level. And he said, to be really successful in the private sector, you really only need to rely on one skill. He said, a government, in order to survive, you need to be doing at least 3 different skills at once in order just to survive. And then, to actually succeed, it takes a lot more. And what I saw through that was that in government, a lot of people would be good communicators, but that didn't mean they were good project managers or good policy people. And then when we would engage in trying to get deals done, people would often get stuck in the talking points, and they were very wed to the process, not the outcome. So when I got in, a lot of what we did was we were very outcome oriented, because in business, if you don't succeed, you don't eat, so right. It's a little bit of a different mentality. And we really went and tried to drive outcomes in that way. And then I would say the difference with the peace deals that we did, something that really struck me was that we did this phone call between the leader of United Arab Emirates, President of the United States, and the Prime Minister of Israel. And this whole thing had been negotiated in secret. I'd been working on it for 3.5 years. I've been getting ridiculed by everyone saying, why is Jared doing it? He's doing it differently than everyone else. All the people who'd worked on it before me and basically failed were criticizing every single thing I did. And
sure.
I didn't know that I would succeed, but I knew that if I failed, I was going to fail in an original way. I wasn't going to fail by replicating the old approaches that didn't work. And so we worked on it. It was, keeping a secret in our White House in particular, and with the Israelis is almost impossible. And what was interesting is we announced it, and I realized that in a business transaction, usually complete a deal and then property changes hands, right? So one person has more money and the other person has more to do. Mm-hmm. In a peace deal, what I kind of realized after was that all you really do is change people's minds. And so what was interesting was I saw the populations of both of these countries, basically things that they thought were impossible yesterday felt possible today. Mm-hmm. And things that they thought they were forbidden to do, they were now permitted to do. And so they basically had that mindset change, and I that was very kind of touching to me in terms of the difference of it. And so it really was like an enabler of progress and people to dream bigger, think differently, and to do things that they thought they couldn't do yesterday. And what it was able to unleash was pretty incredible. And then we had a lot of technical things. Actually, one of the gentlemen who is here with me, General Correa, who worked with me on the Abraham Accords, who really was an essential partner in pushing it forward. But I remember after we had to get on a plane, go to Israel, then fly over to UAE, and we had to say, okay, well, how do you plug together the financial systems to wire money to each other so they can do business? Mm-hmm. How do you plug together, how do you even get a permit for a plane to land in a different place and to fly over other countries that were forbidding planes to fly over? So there was just a lot of also just technical details we had to work through that we had not anticipated beforehand. But we worked it out. We were improvising and then improvising again and then improvising a little bit more, but it worked.
Interesting. It seems like those technical details are also opportunities for the government bureaucracy to slow everything down, even after the top level stuff has been agreed.
Completely. I mean, well, what I would say is I'm not, people like to hate on government bureaucracy, and I'm not going to say that there's not a lot of reasons to do that. I mean, in government, it's much easier to kill something than it is to bring something forward. So to accomplish anything, you need people coming together from different backgrounds, different experiences, to agree on an intent, and then basically to come up with a plan, and then everyone needs to row together in order to achieve the outcome, which basically means that just one little blockage of an artery and something could get killed. You say, well, if you do this, there's this risk you didn't anticipate, and people in politics will tend to be more cautious because most of the decision-making structure is based on how do you keep your job that you have, as opposed to kind of how do you get the outcome. And so the risk-taking desire of a lot of people is not that great. So I think that in that context, it really becomes something where the people try to block. But I will say that there was a ton of people in the system that I came across as well, that once you kind of were able to give them a vision and then give them direction and then top cover, basically saying, if you try to do this and you fail, or if something goes wrong, I will take the blame. And once you do that, you have a lot of amazing people who will run through brick walls for you. And so I would say, like anything else, it's probably, there's good people, there's bad people, and management is important. I would also say that, it's very easy to be defeatist and find reasons why things won't happen. And, I guess my view is it's like a time duration game where, every day is like, sand going through the hourglass. And so I basically took the mindset of like, okay, if this thing failed or they're telling me it's not going to happen, if I think it's a virtuous outcome that I want to try to accomplish, then how do I find another way to try to push it forward? And so maybe that forced me to work with people that others may have thought might not be on board, or that maybe I initially thought wouldn't have been good partners to achieve something. And I kept being surprised, mostly to the positive. There were some times I was surprised to the negative as well, with how destructive people could be. But I always assumed that maybe we just had difference of understanding as opposed to chalking it up to maybe evil or negative intent.
Right. All right, so let's talk about Affinity Partners. So the firm is about 2.5 years old. I think you're around $3 billion in AUM. I'm sure with the relationships you built through your career, but especially in the White House, gives you a really interesting global perspective, and I'm sure access to really interesting deal flow. So tell us a little bit about Affinity. What is the sort of the goal there?
Sure. So it's been 2.5 years now. It's been it's been a really fun journey so far. Parts of it have been hard and parts of it have been really exciting. When I left government, I wasn't really sure what I was going to do. And I started talking to a lot of different friends of mine who were investors or who were running companies. And a lot of people were reaching out to say, well, I have this particular problem, or I have this opportunity. You have a global perspective and a lot of different relationships, and you were involved in so many different complicated situations that I'd love to get your perspective, and maybe you could help me navigate that. And I basically, after getting this a couple times, was thinking to myself, I could give advice. Advice is free, and it's worth what you pay for it when it's free. But I said that there was some opportunities that I thought I could really add value to solving these problems. And I said, instead of me just helping you, let me maybe invest next to you. And so I'm vested in it, and let's work together to try to accomplish that. So that was really the thought process on what I was trying to do. We then went out, I spoke to some investors, and I was able to raise a good quantum of capital. It was a very, very hot market at the time. We raised just over $3.1 billion. And then I basically said it's my third career, so I tried to learn from the different mistakes in my first and second career. First thing I said was, you always make your biggest mistakes in your freshman year. And so I was just very deliberate to go slow. And that turned out to be, I think, very, very, probably a couple of years I'll say it was smart. Now I'm going to say it was maybe lucky. The market was really crazy. I had a lot of friends trying to help me get started, sending me deals. And a lot of the deals were based on revenue multiples, saying this is a 15 times multiple versus, and I'm saying, when I was in business beforehand, everything was based on cash flow. I'm not sure this necessarily makes sense. And so we were very, very selective in what we did to start with. Second thing I did was I really worked on recruiting. I didn't hire a headhunter. I just called all my smartest friends and kind of told them what I thought I was trying to do. And they really were able to send me a lot of resumes. So I really interviewed hundreds of people myself and really tried to build the right foundation for a team. We're about 35 people now. We've done that pretty slowly, and that's gone pretty well. So we invested about 20% of the fund in the first 2 years, and then we've really picked up the pace over the last couple months. We've done about $600 million in the last couple months, and it's been really interesting. And again, when you're in the investment business, obviously you get to meet with all the smartest people and focus on the trends you want to do. When I was in government, a lot of my day was spent dealing with problems that either I didn't create or most of them I didn't have personal interest in, but then they'd come and there's high stakes, you have to solve them. When you're in the investment business, you really get to choose what are the areas that you think are going to be the most interesting and the most impactful, and then you get to spend time studying them and try to come up with a point of view and think about ways that you could be investing and adding value towards accelerating trends that you think are virtuous. So I've loved it in every way, and it's been a really, really fun couple of years. Working hard, but that's something I did in my last job too, but at least I feel here like I'm much more in control of my own time and my own topics that I'm able to spend time on.
What would you say the biggest differentiator is for Affinity compared to other growth funds?
So I do like focusing more on growth than on turnarounds, right? I think that it's just it's better to have the wind at your back. I had several experiences in my previous investing career where I was looking at some assets that were really a bargain, and I always found that you do better overpaying for Fifth Avenue than maybe kind of getting a bargain on kind of Second or Third Avenue. And so I do like things that are growing, strong management teams, but what I've tried to do is build it where we're complementary to all firms and really competitive to no firms. So basically every deal we've done so far, we've done with other top PE or growth firms as partners. And I like that too because it gives you the ability to have other people who are checking your work as well. Not that we don't have confidence, but it's always better to have extra sets of eyes. And I do like having partners. I find that we're able to add value in ways that they're not, and we're able to take advantage of their operating platforms that are a little bit larger than ours. And so but we're able to do things on the geopolitical side, on the connection side, on the problem-solving side that I think that they've found very valuable as well.
Are there any global trends in particular that you're excited about, trying to take advantage of?
So, I mean, the first one, which I'm sure everyone's been speaking about today, is obviously artificial intelligence, and that's something that I caught the end of what Brad was saying. I think he's right. We're still in the fairly early stages of where that's going to play, but definitely convinced that the impacts of it are going to be absolutely massive. You think about all the efficiency that it's going to be creating in the world, and that will create a lot of value. I do think that there's a lot of benefit that a lot of the incumbents have with this new technology, which is maybe a little bit different than some of the technologies in the past. What we're looking at now is obviously the infrastructure that's going to enable it to scale. There's a lot of compute power needed, a lot of energy needed in order to get there. So just from a base infrastructure perspective, that's very interesting. We've been following very closely what's been happening with the LLMs and how those have been applied in different ways. And obviously, once we go to multimodal models, I think that you'll see that even more energy will be needed, more compute power will be needed, but the applications will change tremendously as well. So I think that we have looked at a lot of investments in different areas relating to it, but I do think that as this expands, basically all industries will be touching this in one way or the other. So that's probably where we've been spending the most time recently. Also looking at things in energy side, energy transition. We've done a deal in software, a couple deals in software, which obviously is an efficiency play and still a fast growing and for a long time we think a good business. Looking at some things related to the shift in nearshoring. I think that there's been a big shakeup in how I think the global shifts in trade will flow based on different geopolitical tensions and that have occurred. And so I would say those are some, but we're pretty open aperture, and again, it's every day learning new things and enjoying it.
Yeah. Any particular regions of the world, or just sort of open to anywhere? I guess the question is, where is the majority of your deal flow coming from? Is it tied to a particular region?
Yeah, so U.S. is still the best. I mean, it's by far the best market in the world. It's where everyone wants to invest. A little bit more of a perfect market than other places, but America's a place, best rule of law, amazing innovation, great business climate, great rule of law. So that's a market where obviously we'll be predominant in. We're very close. I think we're actually signing tomorrow a deal in Latin America, and we actually have a second one behind there in two different countries. They're both, I'm very, very excited. Less complex businesses, but ones that I think are very solid. I think playing with big tailwind trends and things that I think are done in a very strategic way. We've done a deal in Europe. We are in the Middle East. We closed a deal in UAE, which is good. We're looking at some other things in the region. I think that region, again, right now geopolitically, it's a little complicated. We have a deal in Israel we're closing. And again, I will say too, like, we'll probably talk more about Middle East and what's happening there, but if you think about before the recent skirmish, it was one of the fastest growing regions in the world in terms of the amount of growth that they're trying to generate through investment in human, in their people, in their cities. And so I am net very bullish on that region and what's possible there.
Yeah, that's great. So being in the public eye, I know is not exactly easy. The Journal ran a story titled "Jared Kushner's Deal-Making Career Off to Sluggish Start." Any reaction to that? And to just there's lots of first-time funds that come to our event of all different sizes. Some are huge launches like yours, some are emerging managers, but almost none of them have the kind of scrutiny that I think you face. What's your reaction when you see a headline like that?
It's funny. So actually, the article I thought was pretty good. So the headline was basically saying that we were deploying slow, and that's basically what we said we were proud of, right? It was a pretty hot market when we started, 2021, 22, and so the fact that we went slowly, I mean, one of the things I believe is there's no shot clock investing, right? We have a 5-year investment period, and what mattered to me the most is obviously achieving the returns at the end for the investors, right? And that's what you want. I don't believe there's any shortcuts, right? So you have to, put in the work, you have to, do it in the right way, and that was really what we conveyed. And so, look, I think that the article was I thought, a pretty good article, right? In that it basically said that, we've been slow to deploy, the market was a little hot, the valuations have come down tremendously, and now we're starting to deploy. And so, yeah, we have scrutiny. I mean, it's pretty strange to have an article in the Wall Street Journal for not doing deals versus getting articles usually for doing deals.
That's true.
But my attitude is just keep your head down, do the work, and let the results speak for themselves. And that's what I did in government too. I mean, I had people always trying to challenge when I do things my own way, right? I try to always think about everything from a first principles perspective. And when I was in government, I was doing things that were so different than how they'd conventionally been done that the attacks were pretty vicious for a couple of years. And then ultimately I got the results, and I think the only reason they had to give me credit for achieving the results was because they spent so much time trying to attack me for the approaches that I was taking. So my view is it's just kind of noise, and what really matters in the investing business is it's a fairly objective number that you end up printing at the end of the day. And so that's really all that we're focused on doing, and I'm pretty confident that we're on a great pathway towards accomplishing that.
Let's talk about the southern border. You were involved in the U.S. MCA deal. The border is clearly a mess. What do you think it's even possible to solve the problem that exists at the border?
Completely possible. And this was one of the jobs that I got in government that I didn't necessarily volunteer for, but after my second year in government, the president called me in, and I just had gotten done the largest prison and criminal justice reform in our country, and it was something I worked really hard on. It was a personal passion project for me, and we built a great bipartisan coalition that came together. We signed it. We were going to delay it to the new year, but there's real ramifications of people getting out of prison sooner and going home to see their families, so we really rushed the signing just to have it implemented as quickly as possible. So President Trump called me in and said, "Why are you working on that? You're now working on the border and build the wall and do immigration." And I really said, "Well, I serve at your pleasure, so I'll work on it." I had a lot of friends, maybe from New York, who were very uncomfortable with that issue at the time. And what I did was I just started meeting with a lot of people who had been involved in it for a long time. And the stories I started hearing were horrific. The amount of fentanyl that was being trafficked over the border that was killing people, was causing a lot of problems in our country, and still is. A lot of the women who were brought over, I think the statistic was 80% of them were sexually abused along the way. And then the thing that really bothered me, I mean, all those two things bothered me a lot, but that the people who were successfully coming over the border, because they didn't have any legal status in our country, a lot of them were basically subjected to different forms of human slavery, of modern slavery, because they really were controlled by the people who they had to pay, sometimes with future earnings, in order to survive in this country. So it didn't seem like a proper situation. It didn't seem like an American situation. Then I spoke with the Customs and Border Patrol, and they basically said, we need these barriers. These walls really work. The more that you have these walls, the more that we can be in different places. We also implemented a lot of technology. We used a firm called Anduril, which has done really, really well, which actually, what it was replacing, it had a lot of drones that would film the border, and then it used AI to kind of track the different people we wanted to be interdicting. And that was basically replacing guys sitting in vans watching television screens. So with cameras posted on piles. That was not very efficient. It was one of the few jobs I probably was qualified to take on doing construction, and it was the biggest construction project that the U.S. government did since the Panama Canal. And so we built about 470 miles of wall. It was good, and by the end we had, I think we were down to maybe like 20,000 interdictions a month. So since then, the number has gone up tenfold. And so what I would say is that if you wanted to stop it now, like number one, enforce the laws, right? And I will say too, we think about all the skirmishes happening in the Middle East. There's 10 million people who have come into this country that we have not vetted. They didn't go through our proper process. There's real security risk to our country based on that. Again, I'm very pro-immigration. One of the other things I did at the time was we developed a whole merit-based system where we studied the Canadian system, we studied the Australian system, we studied the Japanese system. We basically said that being a member of the club called America should be a very exclusive thing, and we should have people applying, going through the front door, and we should be inviting all of the most brilliant minds in the world and people who will come to this country, create GDP, fill the jobs that we need. And we developed a system. We were never able to get that passed, but it was a really interesting exercise to work with the different economists to go through. A sidebar on that is the hard right people on the right who were not happy that I was involved in this, they were saying that if you open up and you do too much legal immigration, it will lower wages. So they were being the populist protectors of the workers. And then what I basically realized is that's just a math problem. So we brought in actually a top economist and a big immigration hawk. And we basically said that we should be able to, the number of people we let in should be indifferent. Everyone we do should actually be leading to raising wages. And so we were able to develop a system that we thought accomplished that. So I think that we negated that criticism. But in order to stop the flow of the border, I mean, it's nice what they're talking about in Congress, but number one, we have a lot of rules in the book that if you enforce them, if they can get back down to where we had it, then that's a 90% decrease just through that. Number two is build more border wall. I mean, it's not a new technology, a wall, and it's something that if you speak to the Border Patrol agents, they think it's something that's very important, and it helps them do their job better. And then the third one was one that actually, the third thing I would say is just work with Mexico. It wasn't necessarily intuitive, but if you went back to the 2016 campaign, everyone thought that if Trump was elected, he would go to war with Mexico. And by the end, we were working great with the president, who's now the current president, AMLO, and he's done quite a nice job down there. And if you work with them respectfully, there's a lot of ways to make a big difference. So it's a very solvable problem. I think they came in the beginning and I saw maybe, I don't know if they did it because they thought these were the right policies or they just thought that anything that Trump did was bad, but they ripped up all the different rules that we put in place and changed all of our policies. And I was just sitting there saying that this is not going to be pretty. And what's happened is just really awful. And so a very, very solvable issue, but politicians are doing now what politicians do, which is blame the other side. And but I am confident that the people who are in power now, they have all of the tools they need to make a significant dent in it if they are willing to do that.
Why do you think the wall was so controversial? Like, I never understood that. It seems pretty obvious that if you just put up a barrier that's big enough that it will create resistance. There are clearly ways around it, but why do you think this became such a political hotcake?
I saw a lot of people again, I try to always be empirical, look at data and try to hear what other people say. It became a very emotional issue for people. People said that the wall was xenophobic or racist. I just said, again, it wasn't an issue that I was necessarily, again, some people thought it was the most important issue. Maybe when I started, I thought it was maybe like the 50th most important issue. I came to realize that immigration and having a border for a country is really one of the most critical issues for a country, right? You need to be able to secure your country, and you should always know who's inside your country. You saw what happened in Israel when their border was breached. That obviously was awful. And then I also think that from our country's perspective, if you think about it, if we have 8 billion people in the world, and you basically said, who wants to be an American citizen? I don't know, we still are the best country in the world, I believe. I don't know, over 7 billion of them would probably raise their hand tomorrow. So if you think about our long-term viability, we should be a vacuum cleaner for, we're talking about AI, and we talk about the competition with China and other countries. If we were figuring out how to have a system that allowed all of the best and brightest in all industries. By the way, we have a shortage of welders in this country, so we should be opening it up to welders. Anyone who could help, I'm not just saying just get the brilliant computer scientists, but people who can come in and fill the open jobs that we have, those are people we should be inviting into our country. And I saw when we did the scoring from a budgetary perspective, first of all, it meant that our country would be massively competitive for the foreseeable future, and the surplus economic activity that it would bring would be quite good. So I don't know, but people have twisted a lot of issues politically in different ways. I can't say I fully understand the rationale behind it, but yeah, it became controversial for some people, but it became controversial enough for me that it was something I wasn't looking to get involved in. But then when I was basically told to get involved in it, I didn't have any moral qualms over it, because I spoke to the guys at the border and they said that this was important to them. And so I was asked by the president to do something, and I went and did it, and I'm very proud that I was able to accomplish that.
Yeah. Do you think the hyper-partisanship, do you think there's any end in sight to it? Do you think the country could ever return to more of a bipartisan attitude? Like when I was a kid, there wasn't this unbelievable hatred and animosity across the aisle. I mean, Congress functioned like relatively well in retrospect compared to today, where I feel like they just barely ever get anything done. Do you think it's possible to ever get past this?
So, first of all, I'm an optimist. It's way more fun to be an optimist, and that's where I am. When I was in government, a couple examples of bipartisanship that we were able to accomplish. First of all, the Abraham Accords was praised even during a tough presidential election by people from both sides. A lot of the policies have been continued, and that turned out to be a bipartisan accomplishment. The USMCA trade deal, when they passed NAFTA, its predecessor in 1993, it only got 54% vote in the House, and that was after a lot of arm twisting and wrangling. The USMCA that we passed, again, trade deals are zero-sum, so they're very, very controversial. And again, we had everyone screaming and going crazy for a couple of years, but we got 90% of the House voted for it, endorsed by the labor unions, from Republican administration. That was big. And then the criminal justice and prison reform bill that we did ended up getting 87 votes in the Senate. But I put an asterisk with that because Lindsey Graham was in Afghanistan, and Tim Scott voted against it. I think, Richard Burr voted against it because he was pissed at Tim Scott on something else that had nothing to do with the bill. And so in my heart, I have 89, but the actual scorecard said 87. And that was just a great example of sitting with people from both sides. I worked with, in the House, a guy, Doug Collins from Georgia, and then Hakeem Jeffries, who's now the minority leader for the Democrats. But Hakeem was great. I mean, Doug was getting beaten up by the guys on the right. Hakeem was getting beaten up by people on the left. I mean, he had people like John Lewis, who was a great civil rights icon, coming out against our bill, attacking us. And we all just kind of held our arms together, and we agreed on what we wanted to accomplish, and we trusted each other. And that communication got us through some very, very difficult times and a lot of attacks from all sides. So I don't know if now's a more divided time necessarily than other times in our country. I've read a lot of history when I was in government, and I continue now to just consume a lot of history. And we have a lot of times in our country where it's been very divided. But I always believe that leaders have the opportunity and the ability to take responsibility and reach across and do their best to try to make it happen. And I believe that just because it's one way today, it doesn't mean it can't be different tomorrow. So I am very optimistic that somehow, somewhere, some way, we will return to a place where the big priorities can be worked on, and the best possible bipartisan outcomes can prevail.
Well, I hope you're right. You are
See what
definitely an
happens.
optimist.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's shift.
I'm not sure I'd bet a ton of money on that happening, but
Right, there we go. You're also a realist. So let's shift to the Middle East. Obviously, all eyes are on the Middle East following the October 7th attacks. You were the lead architect, really, of the Abraham Accords. What do you see as the best possible outcome that we could achieve given the current situation?
So if you go back to where we left it, I think that that's not far away, and then just build off of it, right? So if you go back to 2016, the Middle East was an absolute mess, right? So Syria was in a civil war where 500,000 people were killed. Yemen was destabilized. Libya was destabilized. ISIS had a caliphate the size of Ohio, where they ruled over 8 million people. They were killing journalists. They were beheading Christians. And then Iran was flush with cash based on the JCPOA deal and on a glide path to a nuclear weapon. They were using that cash to fund the Houthis, Hamas, Hezbollah, and a lot of other militias. So we came in, and again, with no experience in the Middle East, I think I'd been to Israel on like a summer trip, when I was a kid. I basically was asked to try to make sense of it. And I spent about a year just talking to everyone and trying to kind of make sense of where should this go and try to understand the issues between the Israelis and the Palestinians and all the different tensions. And over 3 years, we were able to kind of make a lot of progress, right? So we destroyed the territorial caliphate of ISIS. We put really crippling sanctions on Iran, where we basically dissected their economy. So they were selling 2.6 million barrels of oil a day when Obama left office. When President Trump left office, they were selling 100,000 barrels of oil a day. They were out of foreign currency reserves, and what we saw was that they were very couched in a defensive position, just trying to hold on.
And I'm sorry, what are they selling today? How many
3
barrels?
million. About 3 million.
So it's basically
a lot of it's
back.
on black market. And the sanctions are still in place, just not being enforced. And so they've taken in over $100 billion in revenue since the new administration's come in. And not surprisingly, Hamas is more aggressive, Hezbollah is more aggressive, the Houthis are back to mischief, and that's just what they do, right? And so, so that was really where we saw the root cause, right? So the divide in the region that I saw was really the divide between those who wanted to use religion to kind of cause mischief, to maybe justify their power and scapegoat other people and maybe divert from their shortcomings, and then those who really wanted to kind of build a next generation for their future. And I do think there was a big shift in the region post-Arab Spring, where a lot of the leaders said, we need to give the next generation hope, we need to give them jobs and opportunity, and I think a lot of that change has happened. So that was really the two sides to it, and that actually put, in my mind, Israel and the UAE and the Gulf countries in more of the same category, because they all want to invest in technology and infrastructure. And after 20 years, I think the region was tired of spending all their money on bullets and bombs, and they said, why don't we invest in bridges and degrees and all these different things. And so that was really what we tried to do. So in the last 6 months, so we had 6 peace deals. So we had the deals with Israel and UAE, the Abraham Accords deal, and then in trying to get Saudi Arabia to go with Israel, obviously Bahrain went, and that went very smooth. And Saudi they waived their airspace requirements. We were able to start doing direct El Al flights from Israel to UAE. It was actually pretty funny how that even came. We were just thinking, what do we, we had issues after we made the announcement. We had issues with the Israeli government and with the UAE government, because there were a couple things that had been agreed on that people weren't abiding by. And so we basically said, we've got to go to Israel to kind of get this straight. We flew over to Israel. And a young gentleman who worked with me, a guy, Avi Berkowitz, said, well, instead of taking a government plane, why don't we see if we can get the first commercial flight over there? I said, okay, let's try, let's see. So we called them, and they said, well, if the Israelis behave, we'll let the flight in. And so we went to Israel. They agreed. El Al was willing to give us a plane. And then we called the Saudis, and we said, hey, can we fly over your country? It's 40,000 feet in the air. Nobody's going to notice. And at the last minute, they gave us the agreement to do that. So we were just kind of making it all up as we went along at the end, but it was... everything was starting to feel possible, and we were moving that forward. The big block that Saudi had was they were fighting with Qatar. So if you remember, I think in 2017, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Egypt, and Bahrain did a blockade on Qatar. And there were some old issues that they had to work through, and that took 3 years. And what Saudi says, we can't move forward until we have that worked out with Qatar. So we worked on that issue very, very aggressively. It's a lot of fun stories. Some of them I told in my book, some of them I can't even tell because they're so funny. But we ended up getting that through, and that happened January 5th, 2021. So that was the last piece. So if you go back to that time, tons of momentum in the region. The mindset in Saudi Arabia had changed, right, completely. The young new leader, MBS, had come in. He had this whole ambitious plan for economic reforms. And the reason why we worked so closely with Saudi Arabia was we said, when in 2016, the talking points in the campaign were, first we have to defeat the territorial caliphate of ISIS, and then we have to win the long-term battle against extremism. And I looked at the capabilities in the US government and realized we just don't have the capabilities to win that ideological battle. And Saudi Arabia, the custodian of the two holy sites, was willing to kind of change and really take very strong steps with us to kind of combat extremism and counterterrorism. And that partnership turned out to be very, very substantive and very, very fruitful in making great strides towards changing the direction of what a lot of people were being taught in mosques and bringing a more, I can't say more modern, what they like to say is they didn't modernize it, they say they restored it to its original intent, basically saying that a lot of the extremists had taken the religion and subverted it for their own uses, so however you want to call it. So bottom line is there was a lot of momentum in 2021. I think what happened was they stopped enforcing the sanctions with Iran. They kind of ran there to try to make a deal, and Iran just felt very emboldened. President Trump used to say that Iran never won a war, but they've never lost a negotiation. And I think the weakness of going to them, not enforcing the sanctions, they just kept poking and prodding and trying to figure out what they can get away with. And as a result, it created vulnerabilities that obviously manifested in what happened on October 7th. And then now you see the shipping disrupted in the Red Sea with the Houthis, who we had designated a terrorist organization. One of the first things this administration did is they came in and they took them off the designation list, and now I think they just redesignated them once they started blowing up ships. And so I think it's very possible. I think the Saudi-Israel, so you want to go back to that same framework, which is how do you build an arc of stability from Israel all the way from Haifa to Muscat and Oman. Let's get the whole GCC with Jordan and Egypt together. Over time, if you can get Iraq stable enough, you bring them in. Syria is still a little bit of a wild card, but again, you have to deal with it. And the goal is to figure out how do you show that next generation that there's an opportunity to live a better life. And the more that you see, like in Saudi Arabia, they let women drive. They started relaxing some of the guardianship rules. Then they started letting women go to soccer matches. And now in Iran, they're letting women go to soccer matches. So I think the best way to fight against this extremist ideology is just to all move forward, with giving people the opportunity to live a better life. And no matter what religion you are, I think we all want to be respectful of each other's religion, respectful of each other's perspectives, but let's work together to create that opportunity. And so that's the framework I would work in. And the pieces are still there because you now have that linkage of the Abraham Accords, which I think has really held back further escalation because it would have been a big pile-on from the Arab states against Israel. It's given a voice inside the Arab world against Hamas and against the Islamists. And I think it's created a much more moderate balance of power. And I still think there's a lot of industrial logic to the Saudi-Israel deal that means that it should happen, whether it happens next week, whether it happens in 3 months, whether it happens in 2 years. It will happen now. It's a question of
a deal
when.
Between Israel and Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, I think that's the signaling. Again, there's still some complicated things that need to be worked through. And obviously it's only been made more complicated by what happened. It's a shame they waited so long, because again, I do think it could have been done, right away if they spent a couple of years kind of bashing Saudi when it was just like I don't know how that served the interests of America. And now obviously we're kind of we're stuck in war. As you saw, we had some U.S. servicemen killed, and so So the answer is I think there's a lot of really good outcomes that could happen, but I also think there's a lot of risk that if not managed correctly, there's still very negative forces in that region, and the natural negative inertia, it seems like, is trying to creep back in. But there's a lot more positive forces now that are at least trying to counter that. And so with good leadership, you should be able to work it to a good outcome. Sorry for such a long answer on that.
No, it's fine.
I tried to do this as succinctly as possible.
How concerned are you, though, that given the current state, that this does escalate into a broader regional conflict. I mean, I definitely agree that there's a lot of positive energy coming out of the Middle East. I mean, I feel it personally in my business. We're doing an event in about a month in the UAE. Everyone over there that I've met, they just want to do business. They want to live happy lives. They want opportunity for their kids. I don't see them as I don't see the motives as any different than here in the US. But it's a very intractable problem. And when you see drone attacks, like the one over the weekend that killed the 3 servicemen, how worried are you that something will set off a broader conflict?
It's very possible. I'll speak first about like the positive energy, right? So I was in Saudi Arabia a couple months ago for their FII event, and they had a small event on the side with all of these startups in Saudi. I met all these, this guy's a unicorn company, and I remember in 2019, we did a event in Bahrain where we built a whole business plan for the Palestinians, and we really tried to set this up where we could have where we can kind of show role model of what these societies can be. And we were having trouble finding, we had sports stars, we had a couple of business leaders, but there was no young entrepreneurs in that region that we were able to identify that either felt comfortable being out there, doing this, or that were just so obvious. And what's happening now in Saudi and UAE and Qatar and all these countries, in Egypt and in Jordan, you have all these like businesses being built, and that young generation is starting to get the bug of entrepreneurialism. And I think that that's an amazing thing. And that's really a credit to the leadership who's encouraged that and pushed that, and they're creating the environment for that. And I think that that's just a different pathway, especially in Saudi Arabia, than what was necessarily available to them 5 years ago. So that's a big sea change. And from a US perspective, that's massive, right? You want the next generation looking to do business, not to be vulnerable to be recruited by these terrorist organizations that are looking to create destruction. But in terms of what are the risks of escalation, I heard a lot of talk when I was in Israel about the northern border. I think that it's definitely something that needs to be dealt with, but I think it's something that that you need to deal with very methodically and thoughtfully. I think it's a very tough situation. If either side escalates, it's like mutually assured problems. And so I think that there has to be a thoughtful approach to deal with it. You can't be acting with emotion in times like this. Motion is important, but you can make some very, very big mistakes. But I do think from Israel, like there's a lot of pain in the country, and I think that there's a lot of feeling like they have to finally address the problems that maybe they were not willing to address, or maybe they willfully or ignorantly ignored for too long. And I think there's a real will to try to do something about it. So let's see what happens. It's such a combustible region that one small thing could lead off. You're looking now what's happening in the Red Sea, not in the Red Sea, in the Strait of Hormuz with the Houthis, how that's subverting global shipping. There's a lot of risk of conflagration. And so, look, I think that going back to it, there's a way to deal with this that I think would be thoughtful, smart, strategic, and effective. But again, it would be going back to not just the mix of policy that we put in place, it's also the unpredictability, the temperament. We had everyone off guard playing on our terms. Right now, for the last couple of years, the U.S. is basically playing on Iran's terms, right? So, they're arming the Houthis, and then the Houthis are causing problems, and then we hit back at the Houthis, and Iran's saying, "Oh, we want nothing to do with it." Well, that's playing on their terms. Same thing. They fund Hamas, and we're going after Hamas. Iran, that's on their terms. You have to really create a situation where people understand that this won't be tolerated, and to make it harder to effectuate. Bad people will do bad things, and they'll only change their approach if they don't have any other options to change. They're not going to do it because they wake up one morning and say, "Hey, I've got a great idea. Let's go stop being terrorists." It just doesn't work that way in the real world.
They don't turn over a new leaf.
They might be able to if they have no other option.
Right. All right, so that's a great segue. So we're in election season, and President Trump is looking pretty strong in the primaries. If elected, what would his priorities be?
I'd say one of the things that was great about President Trump is you always knew where he stood on everything, right? So I wouldn't say that it's a great mystery on what he would do. He's always willing to kind of tell you. If you read his speeches, you see what his priorities are. One of the things they told us when we got to the White House, we met with a lot of chiefs of staff from previous administrations, and they said in the White House you should only work on one big priority at the time and keep the narrative. President Trump increased the metabolism of government and was willing to work on everything at one time. So all the different things that he says will be a priority, I'd imagined he would get to work on. This time, obviously, he would have a lot more flushed out perspective on how to do it. He has experience governing now. One of the lines I heard, which I love, was they say you campaign in poetry and then you govern in prose. And a lot of President Trump's policies, especially on the 2016 campaign, were very much a departure from both parties, right? The way he was thinking about trade or different issues. So we got into government and we didn't really have a unified objective on how to accomplish those. So we had to work through a lot of internal issues and flesh out the policies. I'd say right now he has a real stable of very competent, excited people. And I think he's more thoughtful on how to manage, how to navigate Congress, how to navigate the bureaucracy. And I think he'd be willing to really go for it and do all the things that he's telling you he's going to do. So actually, it's funny people ask that question a lot, but I don't think it's that great of a mystery. And then the other side of it, too, is that even from people I speak with who aren't necessarily fans of his, they try very hard to maybe distance themselves and say, but I do love all of his policies. And so my sense is that with him, the policies are kind of the policies, and I think that's what he would go and try to effectuate. But I will say with him, even working with him, you never know.
Really?
He would always keep us guessing, yeah. But that was one of the tough things for when we were negotiating with China, or we were negotiating with Iran or North Korea. They couldn't figure out what he could do. We mostly knew what he was going to do, but he kept us on our toes too, and that's kind of why it worked. But he's a business guy. That's how he thinks.
No, actually, I think with bad actors, that's an excellent strategy. It's like high volatility. They don't know what they're going to be dealing with from day to day, and I think that could absolutely be an advantage.
Yeah, and by the way, and sometimes it created linkages, right? You think about North Korea. If you remember, I had friends in 2017 calling me, should I not go to Hawaii? Because they were shooting missiles. And we were able to reach out, get a connection. Again, that's a deal I wish we could have finished, but we definitely de-escalated that tremendously by building a personal relationship and a dialogue. You look at Russia. Again, we got tons of criticism. People said we colluded with Russia. I personally spent now, between all the different investigations, I've done 33 hours of testimony before the House, the Senate, special counsel, grand juries, all for the privilege of going and volunteering in government, not taking a salary for 4 years. And so basically, they said we colluded with Russia, which after 2 years of investigation, it turned out we didn't collude with Russia. But we had no problems, right? So under Bush, they attacked Georgia. Under Obama, they took Crimea. Under Trump, they did nothing. And then under President Biden, they come in and there's a war now with Russia. And so I think it was just about building relationships, keeping the phone working, having dialogue, and really a lot of his focus was on pragmatic realism, which is what are the interests of my country? How do I pursue those interests? If there are other countries maybe that we have different value systems from, let's not judge them based on their values. Let's focus on interests. Let's agree on what our common interests are. Let's work on all those issues to put forward. And then the areas where we disagreed, let's try to talk about those privately. And if we really cared, maybe we talk about them a little publicly, but which he wasn't afraid to do either. So,
Clearly.
Yeah.
Okay, so you have a fair amount of experience now doing trade deals, peace deals, analyzing all of these huge problems and navigating complex government systems, building relationships around the world. I'm going to guess that if President Trump were to be reelected, he's probably going to ask you for a little help. So if you were asked to serve again, what would your answer be?
Yeah, so like I said, first of all, he has a ton of really good people around him on the campaign and in the transition. What I've been saying since I left government is 4 years in government was, it was a lot. It's a very, very intense life. You work 24/7. You can't be at your kid's soccer game and say, oh, let me not take this call because it's a world leader or somebody calling on a problem. You can't say, let me not take the one meeting, because that meeting for somebody could be the most important meeting of their year or their life, right? That could impact the policies. So my wife and I both worked 24/7 for 4 years straight. We have 3 young kids who we've really been enjoying time with. We're loving the business I'm doing, and so for me, that's really what my intent is to stay with my family, stay with my business, and like I said, I didn't leave government with any regrets. I don't covet to have that responsibility again, and like I said, we left it all on the table, we left it all on the field, and really feel very, very proud of everything we were able to accomplish.
No, but really.
Yeah, like I said, let's hope everything gets resolved even before he gets there and the world goes back into great shape. And if he does get there, then again, we'll continue to support him in every way we can as family members.
Well, that's great. Jared, thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate it.